Good afternoon, this is Nicholas from Gandora Gaming, and I bring you all my reveal for new Dogmatica and IceJade cards. Holy shit, this card is a house. This is a boss monster and all boss monsters. This is what the Dogmatica rituals were waiting on. This guy is fantastic. Now, he does have a really interesting effect, which based on how Judge rule it, will determine if this card is viable and will actually reach meta playability. Now, tomorrow's video is a Dogmatica Spellbook Invoked deck, which I can't wait to show you all. So, this deck already, Dogmatica themselves are still playable in 2022. Even though Tier Element and Splight are the best decks, Dogmatica is still a viable strategy. And especially because Judgment's now at 1. Now, this card right here makes the ritual version of Dogmatica actually crazy. So, this is their new boss monster. It's a ritual. It is Dogmatica. I believe his name is White Zoa Dogmatica. So, first things first, this guy is a house of a card. Like I said, he's 4,000 attack, 4,000 defense, and he's crazy. He has the continuous effect that all Dogmatica monsters you control while he's on the field are unaffected by opponent's monsters, especially someone from the extra deck, which is a fantastic card. The fact that he just basically says, hey, you can't negate Ecclesia, you can't negate the Fleur-de-Lis, you cannot negate any of my monsters, thus they're immune to all your card effects, is really, really stupid. A lot of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is removing cards using monster effects, and the fact that he's a 4,000 means the only real way to get rid of him is by beating over him. Which, the only way I could see that is with Access Code or maybe Boros Sword, even if people are even playing Boros Sword. So Access Code is really the only way to go. I know Agnes can kind of get bigger than him, but still, he's a 4,000 attack monster. And don't forget, the Dogmatica cards also have attack boosting. I believe their new ritual they received earlier this year or earlier last year, the Dogmatica of White, I think its name is, doesn't that give attack when you can give a monster its attack boost? Meaning you can give this monster a super boost in attack, making it really, really hard to out this thing? I gotta look into that. There is a Dogmatica card that boosts his attack. There's also another thing they had to look at is that his second effect is also busted. So not only is a 4,000 basically towers, he's unaffected by monster effects, which is great. Basically, he has the it's only continuous though. So basically meaning that activated effects he's immune to. Thus, continuous effects he is not. He's kind of like Psychic in that way. And he, for example, Babushka still works because Babushka does not activate the Book of Moon, not Book of Moon, to put everyone in defense position. So a bit, Babushka still works, but he's just a really, really house of a monster, and his second effect is really, really stupid. And based on how the judges say how this ruling works, determine if this card's even more broken or okay. So its second effect says your opponent gets to choose one of two options. And depending on the option, this effect happens to them. They either, first option, which is the best option for us as your opponent, is that they either send cards from their hand or from their extra deck to grave for every extra deck monster they have in their extra deck. So if they say they have 15 cards in their extra deck, for every 2 cards of that 15, they have to send 1 card from their hand or from their extra deck to grave. Meaning, let's say they choose extra deck, they got to send 7 cards from their extra deck. And if you choose hand, well, then he has to send 7 cards from his hand to grave, which is stupid. And if you're going first and you summon this dude, you just set their entire hand away. They lose. Now, of course, your opponent's never going to choose that. They're probably always going to choose the extra deck. But modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Says you're going to need your extra deck, boy. And if you're sending 7 of it immediately, that only leaves you with, I believe, 8 cards left in your extra deck, which is a great thing for Dogmatica. Because not only that, the rituals are fucking with your extra deck, because this is not the only ritual. There's all the ritual monsters in Dogmatica fuck with your opponent's extra deck. Maximus fucks with your extra deck. There's a new continuous spell we just got in Power the Elements that fucks with your opponent's extra deck. And we have a new other ritual spell that fucks, well, not a ritual spell, a normal spell, a continuous spell that fucks with your extra deck. So there's so many ways to mess with your opponent's extra deck now. It's ridiculous. And you can really rip their entire extra deck out nowadays. It's crazy. Now, the second effect they get to choose is really, really strong, but not strong going first. So this effect says they can return all extra deck monsters on the field, and I believe gray, I think it's just field, back to the extra deck. It's like a compulse for everything, which is really, really good. The only issue is going first, they're always going to choose that option to just bounce everything back because they just resummon it. You know what I mean? And if they're going first, they don't have any monsters to do that. So that does nothing. It's a nothing effect. So depending on how the judge rules it, will determine if ultimately it's playable going first. And what I mean by that is, Dogmatica is a really cool deck in building boards when it comes to like the rituals. But if you get to basically force your opponent to either send 7 from their extra deck or just discard their whole hand, it's going to really shape up the game. And I know against like Dangers and against Tier Element that isn't really the greatest because I think it sends for effect, plus they'll all trigger, which is kind of crazy. But discarding their entire hand is pretty good. You trigger shit on your turn, it's still making all your Dogmaticas are unaffected anyway. So what possibly could they make to deal with your board? So I think this is a really, really powerful card. It all depends on the ruling the judge does. If your opponent can just say, hey, it's turn 1, I select the second effect to return all extra deck monsters, even though you have no extra deck monsters, then it kind of does suck. I wish it didn't say that. But if it doesn't say that, and they have to choose the option they can only do, then it's kind of busted. No joke. It's really, really strong. I can't wait for Coder or someone to explain this and say, yep, they don't get the option because there is nothing to return. Thus, they have to do the first option, and thus, you win the game because they have no extra deck and all your monsters are unaffected by your opponent's extra deck anyway. Thus, you win unless it's dinosaurs, in which case you're losing because Conductor's eating your ass. Anyway, now it's time for their continuous spell, which they just got. So our next card we have is Dogmatica Matrix. It's our new continuous spell we just got. This card is kind of busted. So first things first, when this card resolves, its first effect says you can add 1 Dogmatica ritual or ritual spell from your deck to your hand, which is fantastic. And then if your opponent controls a monster, you get to add a Dogmatica monster from your deck to your hand as an additional effect. So it's a +2 if your opponent already has a card, which is fantastic. And then it has the second effect of once per turn, you can look at your extra deck or your opponent's extra deck and then send 1 card from your extra deck or your opponent's extra deck to grave if you control a ritual Dogmatica monster, which is quite powerful. The fact that you just look at your opponent's extra deck and be like, nah, I don't want you, is a quite powerful effect and helps you even more in the hand ripping of the extra deck. Dogmatica has always been an archetype that says, fuck the extra deck, you don't get to play it, I get to play it. So I'm really happy that the Rituals support is actually insanely good. The Rituals have always been a little lackluster, and these 2 new cards really do shake up the meta, at least when it comes to the Rituals themselves. I really do think there's potential. There's even potential with Drytron. You always got to look at Drytron and be like, ooh, there's no Ritual cards, they're kind of busted, you might play them in that. Plus, a 12 is kind of really easier to make in Drytron, if you think about it, because all the Drytrons treat by level. So if you use the Drytron ritual spell, you can easily summon it. It's like Herald of Ultimateness, but you just use 2 Drytron names, which is pretty good. I will also say this. You also can hand rip cards even more from the extra deck, because the Dogmatica ritual spells, I think, if I remember correctly, they allow you to mess with your opponent's extra deck as well, which is pretty good too. So I can't wait to look into the Dogmatica cards again and see where this new support pushes them, which I'm super excited to see. Alright, so now it's time to talk about the new IceJade cards, which I think are everyone's least excited cards. But to me, IceJade has always been a hugely potential water engine. Like, everyone's saying, oh, the Swap Frog engine and Deep Sea Diva and the Nimbles are the best water engines in Yu-Gi-Oh! But honestly, IceJades are kind of sick. If you haven't never read any of the IceJade monsters, they're all generic, and they all have really, really cool effects. Now, as an archetype as a whole, they never really been anything good. I own an IceJade deck myself. It's a really, really powerful deck to test with, but ultimately, compared to like modern day meta, honestly, as a new archetype, it kind of is lackluster. Now, don't get me wrong, we did get new cards, so the deck isn't terrible, because no modern day deck is terrible. But honestly, IceJade's kind of got the Spring-ins treatment, where they're part of really cool archetypes in lore with the Dogmatica and the Tri-Brigade, but their support isn't as strong as those decks. You know what I'm talking about? Like, Spring-ins and IceJade are both part of the Dogmatica lore, yet their support is usually lackluster. Don't get me wrong, it's cool and all. They're really cool cards. I think even the splites are part of the lore too, the Dogmatica lore. Because their new Splite Smashers works with the Spring-ins. So yeah, even Splite is a better archetype when lore-wise than IceJade and Spring-ins, which have both received more support than Splite has. Which I think is crazy. But hey, what can you do? This deck has huge potential. The deck already has a in-archetype floodgate in the form of the IceJade Curse. Not to mention, it also has some really, really powerful cards, like the IceJade level 4 Tuner, which I think is like a reborn for any water type, which is fantastic. Not to mention, there's a whole bunch of really cool synergies in the deck. But I think that finally having a boss monster really, really fixes the deck. Now, the problem with IceJade is that I think it did get a new card in either Power Elements or Dimension Force, but that card was garbage. It was like a level 8 that was like gained attack. It was a really, really bad card. So I think this is Konami's way of like, I'm sorry, IceJade players, here you go. Here's new support that can help make this archetype rogue status. Now, do I think this deck is going to become meta? No. Do I think this deck is going to take locals? Possibly. And that's what I want to talk about. So, alright, so now it's time to talk about the Synchro. We have IceJade Argentina. I might be mispronouncing the name, but that's fine. So, first things first, she's a Synchro monster, and she's a 3,000 attack Synchro monster. Her level is pretty high, so it's a little harder to make her, but I think in IceJade she should be fine, because a lot of her monsters are level 4. I believe she's either a 10 or a 12. I think she's a 12, meaning it takes 3 IceJades, or a level 8 plus a 4, which should be easy enough. First things first, she has a quick effect to make all IceJade monsters unable to be destroyed by card effects and by banishing, which is really, really strong. And if that effect is activated on the response to an opponent's monster effect, then you can banish, at the resolution of your effect to make it immune, all monsters with that name on the field and or graveyard, which is a really, really powerful effect. Basically, let's say they activate a starter card and they already have another starter in hand. You just be like, okay, I'm going to banish you and banish the one in grave. Deal with it. Really, really strong effect. I can only imagine this with like Kid Kalos. Let's say they have a King Kalos in grave and they have a Kid Kalos on field. You activate the effect, you banish both Kid Kalos, and now they're fucked. Really, really strong effect. It's also a 3,000 and also has a floating effect. So basically, when this card's in your graveyard and a card is banished by your opponent by card effect, you can special summon this card onto the field, which is really, really good. It has great recursion. It is a little specific when it comes to banishing, but nowadays with modern Yu-Gi-Oh, there's so many cards that banish. It's honestly fine. Like all the Sword Soul cards banish. All the Splite cards are playing the Frog engine, so they banish. Rhino Heart banishes itself when it resurrects itself using its graveyard effect. What other cards banish in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh? There's a whole bunch of weird cards that just banish themselves. And it's not too hard to get this guy back on field, which is really, really good. And I think it just has to banish a card you control, meaning you might be able to proc this effect too. I had to read the effect again. I think your opponent has to do it though, which is really, really cool. A decent boss monster. And with this card plus a floodgate, in the form of IceJade's Curse, I'm hoping I'm not butchering that's what the card's name is. I think this deck has potential to steal games. Really, really cool deck. And I hope we get more. So now it's time for the new spell card we received. Alright, so now it's time to talk about a new IceJade spell card in the form of Great IceJade Manifestation, which the artwork is great. It looks like IceJades are fighting off the branded Despia cards, or that Sword Soul. I really can't tell nowadays. The new Sword Soul cards kind of look like the Despian cards, and even the what's it called? The Dogmatica cards look like Despia cards. So I honestly can't tell where the lore is going. It looks like the main IceJade monster, the Synchro we just got, is fighting off against, I think that's branded? I'm not actually sure what that monster is. But basically, this card's really, really good. It's a little situational because it requires your opponent to have a monster either on field or in grave. It also requires you to have a water monster on field. But that isn't really too hard going second to do. The only issue is going first. Your opponent's not going to have a monster in their field or on grave unless they're hand trapping you. Thus, this card can be dead in hand. So that's a little eh. But it has great effects. So first things first, it's a Rhoda. It just special summons any IceJade from your deck, which is fantastic. Or you can just send an IceJade to grave, which is great because IceJades like the graveyard. They have a lot of cool graveyard effects. So it's a really, really powerful card right there and there. It also has the effect where I believe if an IceJade monster would leave the field by any ways, you can then just banish a card, by banishing this card from grave, which is a really, really powerful effect. It just says, hey, stop what you're doing. I'm going to banish you. Really strong effect, and I really like it. So I think it's a good card. I don't think it makes IceJade's meta. I do think it puts them in a tier category, maybe the lowest tier, but it's still a tier. I'm really excited to see where this deck goes. There is a really prominent IceJade community. Funny enough, I actually dueled one at my Sunshine locals. He was talking about a whole bunch of strategies they play in the deck. Like, for example, this guy was playing, like, Deep Sea Diva and Synchron. What's that Synchron Overcharge card that Synchron decks play? It's one of the, I forgot what the card's called, but basically it adds Deep Sea Diva and it allows you to do some shenanigans there. It was a really, really cool combo he showed me. I wish I remembered it exactly, but hey, there's a community for every archetype, and I'm really happy that that community finally got two really good support cards, especially since their last support card wasn't that great. But anyway, I hope you all enjoy. Don't do anything stupid, and you all take care. See ya.